Good, y'all. Gervonta Tank Davis has said on Twitter that he 100% plans to retire from the sport of boxing after his fight with Jake Paul next month in November. But I'm going to explain to you guys why this is very unlikely, right? Now, Gervonta Davis is reportedly getting paid $40 to $50 million for this Jake Paul fight, similar to how much he got paid when he fought Ryan Garcia. And listen, as far as money, as far as financially, he is able to retire from the sport of boxing after this Jake Paul fight. And he probably wouldn't have to come back unless he just got reckless and just fucked off his money. But when you look at the state of the PBC, right, because Gervonta Tank Davis is signed to the PBC, he's Al Haymon, he's one of Al Haymon's guys, right? Think about this, right? Besides Canelo Alvarez, Gervonta Tank Davis is probably looked at as the second face of boxing, right? Obviously, if we're talking about numbers, you would have to say Jake Paul. I know Jake Paul is not looked at as a serious boxer, but when you look at the attention and the views and the revenue that Jake Paul brings into the sport of boxing, whether you like him or not, he is one of the faces of boxing. But if we're talking about real boxers, right? If we're talking about boxers that have been boxing since they was kids, Gervonta Tank Davis is recognized as the second face of boxing behind Canelo Alvarez. Now, when you look at the state of PBC, right? PBC had a deal with Fox. They lost that deal. They had a deal with Showtime. They lost that deal. They currently have a deal with Amazon. We're hearing rumors that after this year, they could report they might possibly lose their deal with Amazon. The PBC is not bringing eyes and pay-per-view numbers to the sport that it did back in the day, right? And it has a lot to do with people fire sticking, people not actually paying for the fights. And let's be honest, boxing is not one of the most popular sports in the world like it used to be. I think it's like number 12 right now. Shout out to Turkey Al-Sheikh. He's helping boxing slowly move up the ranks to become one of the most popular sports in the world again. Shout out to Turkey Al-Sheikh. I love everything that him and Ryder Season is doing for the sport of boxing. They're actually making the fights happen that we really want to see. Not that Jake Paul shit. I'm talking about, the fights that we got with Bivol and Better Beef. We got Terrence Buck Crawford versus Canelo. He's making really good fights happen for the sport of boxing, right? We're supposedly getting Teofimo Lopez versus Shakur Stevenson at the beginning of the year. You know what I'm saying? But guys, think about this, right? If Gervonta Tank Davis at age 30, if he actually does retire from boxing, the PBC is done. Like, if we're being honest, Al Haymon and the PBC, they're done. They're going to lose the deal with Amazon. And what other network what other network or business is gonna take on PBC if they don't have Gervonta Tank Davis? What leverage will they have? Because Canelo Alvarez is no longer with the PBC. Canelo Alvarez is directly doing business with Turkey Al-Sheikh. He has 2 more fights left on his deal for next year. Like, think about it. Who's gonna put the PBC on their back, right? You got Keith Thurman. Keith Thurman is on his way out of boxing. He's 36, 37 years old. He has a fight coming up with Sebastian Fundora this month. I'm actually very excited for this fight. Both of those fighters are signed to the PBC, right? But let's be honest, in 2025, Keith Thurman and Sebastian Fundora, they're not stars in the sport of boxing. Their names aren't big enough to bring people like casuals to the sport of boxing to actually pay for a pay-per-view. They're not bringing eyes to the sport, right? Errol Spence Jr., he's been out of the ring for 2 years since he got knocked out by Terrence Buck Crawford. Errol Spence, he was considered a superstar in the sport of boxing. He most definitely brought eyes to the sport of boxing, right? He sold out the Cowboy Stadium, you feel me? Shout out to Errol the True Spence Jr., but we don't even know if Errol Spence is ever going to box again, right? The man's been out of the ring for 2 years. There's a high possibility that Errol Spence is done, right? He just hasn't announced his retirement yet. Rolly Romero, he's signed to the PBC. He has a fight coming up next year in January against Manny Pacquiao. Think about this, guys. Just the fact that Al Haymon and the PBC had to reach out to a 46-year-old Manny Pacquiao to fight Mario Barrios, that just goes to show how desperate they are to sell pay-per-views. You know what I'm saying? That, to me, is desperation. And if Gervonta Tank Davis does retire, the PBC is done, bro. They're done. They're going to lose their deal with Amazon. They're not going to get picked up by Netflix. The only thing that would be left for them is to go to the zone. That is literally the only thing they would be able to do. And Al Haymon has made it very clear that he does not want to just do direct business and put all of his fighters on the zone, because he's in competition with the zone, right? Like, Al Haymon still thinks PBC is the number one sports brand in the world. He still looks at it like that. We know that's not the case. We know Turkey Al-Sheikh is slowly but surely taking over the entire sport of boxing. Number 2 would probably be Oscar De La Hoya. Number 3 would probably be Eddie Hearn in Matchroom. Al Haymon is not number 1 anymore, bro. It's just not what it is. Al Haymon tried to make a fight happen between Canelo Alvarez and David Benavidez. Canelo Alvarez refused. Canelo Alvarez wanted to fight Baby Charlo, which he did. Then he wanted to fight Big Charlo, Jamar Charlo. That fight never happened. And he felt like Al Haymon was peer pressuring him to fight David Benavidez, who he has no interest in fighting. So because of that, he threatened to leave the PBC. He was gonna go back to the zone or back to Matchroom with Eddie Hearn. And ultimately, Al Haymon was able to convince Canelo Alvarez to come back to the PBC and fight Jaime Munguia, which turned out to be a great fight. I actually saw that fight live. I think that was a good fight, right? But listen, Gervonta Tank Davis is not going to retire. Let me explain why. Al Haymon is going to offer Gervonta Tank Davis the best deal he could possibly get to keep boxing. You will see Gervonta Tank Davis fight again next year, but you are going to see the same type of fights that you've been seeing his entire career. You're going to see Gervonta Tank Davis continue to fight fighters that the fans don't want to see him fight. You're not going to see a rematch with Lamont Roach Jr. You're not going to see Gervonta Davis versus Shakur Stevenson. You're not going to see Gervonta Davis versus Devin Haney. You're not going to see Gervonta Davis versus Teofimo Lopez. You are going to continue to see Gervonta Tank Davis against people that he knows he can beat. You're probably, whoever wins the fight between Rolly Romero and Manny Pacquiao, you possibly might see Gervonta Tank Davis fight the winner. Whether Pacquiao wins or loses, you probably might see Gervonta Tank Davis versus Manny Pacquiao next year. Why? Because Manny Pacquiao will be 47 and he's an absolute shell of himself. You might see Al Haymon bring Lomachenko out of retirement and offer him a career-high payday to fight Gervonta Tank Davis, because that's the fight that they wanted before they ended up fighting Lamont Roach. Vasily Lomachenko just ended up retiring, right? You might see a rematch between Gervonta Tank Davis and Ryan Garcia, because let's be honest, that fight would do very well. You have the whole narrative of Ryan Garcia being on a rehydration clause and him not being the best version of himself against Gervonta Tank Davis. We could possibly see a rematch at a catch weight of 144 or 145 where Ryan Garcia doesn't have a rehydration clause, and that fight would sell. Ryan Garcia has a bunch of followers on social media. Gervonta Tank Davis has a bunch of followers. That fight, the rematch, I think the rematch would sell more pay-per-views than the first fight, because Ryan Garcia has a hardcore fan base, just like Gervonta Tank Davis, right? There's so many things that Gervonta Tank Davis can do to remain in the sport of boxing and to remain undefeated, okay? That's why we got Gervonta Davis versus Jake Paul. It's an exhibition fight. He's going to get a career-high payday. And after he's seen the boxing fans turn on him after he got that draw against Lamont Roach, because Gervonta Davis already, he already wasn't 100% confident that he could beat the top guys in his weight class. But when he seen the fans flip on him and he had that shitty performance against Lamont Roach, at that point, he said, fuck the fans. I'm just doing this 100%. He already was doing it 80 to 90% for the money. Now he's doing it 100% for the money. And think about it, guys. Gervonta Davis could have another exhibition fight. He could fight Conor McGregor in an exhibition fight. He could possibly fight Floyd Money Mayweather in an exhibition fight. There's so many things that he can do to stay on the PBC and to keep making Al Haymon in the PBC money. Al Haymon in the PBC, they can't afford for Gervonta Tank Davis to retire from the sport of boxing. And you better believe that Al Haymon is having conversations behind the scenes telling this to Tank. So Gervonta Davis is not going to retire after he fights Jake Paul. When he says he's going to retire, he's telling you guys that he's not going to take any more serious fights for the rest of his career. He's taking the Jake Paul route, bro. He's taking the Floyd Mayweather. You remember when Floyd Mayweather stopped giving the fans the fights they wanted to see? Remember when we wanted to see Floyd Mayweather versus Keith Thurman? And instead we got Floyd Mayweather versus Andre Berto and Floyd Mayweather versus Juan Marquez and Floyd Mayweather versus Conor McGregor to get his 50th win. Those are the kind of fights that we are going to see Gervonta Davis for the rest of his career. He's 30 years old. He's probably going to stick around in the sport for another 5 years. And he's going to take fights that he knows that the hardcore boxing fans don't want to see. Because guess what? It don't matter who Gervonta Tank Davis fights. His hardcore fan base is going to support him. And casual boxing fans that aren't hardcore boxing fans, they're going to watch his fights no matter what. So it doesn't matter to him or Al Haymon satisfying you guys and fighting who you guys want to see him fight. It's not going to happen, bro. You know what I'm saying? Like, I really was thinking about this last night, and I was like, there's no way Tank retires. If Tank retires, the PBC is done, bro. Al Haymon would have to sell the PBC to somebody, or he would just have to, he would just have to fold and just go to the zone, and the PBC would never be one of the top, boxing promotions in the world. It's just not gonna happen. Gervonta Tank Davis is their last domino that's standing up, bro. Let me tell y'all something. Al Haymon and the PBC, they never wanted Errol Spence to fight Terrence Bud Crawford. That wasn't supposed to happen. Errol Spence was supposed to fight Keith one-time Thurman. Errol Spence had to go against Al Haymon, and he had to make all of these concessions that Terrence Bud Crawford wanted. Because remember, Errol Spence at the time was the bigger draw. He had the better pay-per-view numbers. He had the bigger fan base. He had the leverage. Errol Spence was the A side in the negotiations with Terrence Bud Crawford. It wasn't until Terrence Bud Crawford and Errol Spence had a direct conversation on the phone that they agreed to make this fight happen for the fans. So Errol Spence ended up conceding to a 50-50 split. Errol Spence agreed. I think they rolled a dice, or they did some type of deal where whoever wins the deal gets to walk out first. Terrence Crawford ended up winning. Errol Spence ended up walking out first to the ring. There was a lot of things that Errol Spence gave up in the negotiations to make that fight happen with Terrence Crawford. And I think he never should have done it, but I respect him for doing it, so we was able to get that fight for the sport of boxing, right? But that fight was never supposed to happen, bro. Errol Spence was supposed to fight Keith Thurman, and then he was supposed to move up to 168 to fight Canelo Alvarez. That hurt the PBC, bro. That really was the final blow to the PBC losing their deal with Showtime. That fight, because the fight didn't do well. That fight didn't even sell more pay-per-views than Tank and Ryan Garcia did. It flopped. Because the fight took so long to happen, all of the hype from the fight just died out. It just didn't do good. So that's my thoughts on this. There's no way Tank is going to retire from boxing at age 30. Al Haymon will offer him so much money that he has no choice but to keep fighting. We're just not going to get the fights that we want to see from him. So with that being said, man, this your boy Wavy. Stay Wavy TV. Make sure y'all subscribe, thumbs up the video, leave a comment. I'm out.